and I'm very happy to have on the phone line with me the religious scholar for the United Muslim Masjid. Our dear brother Sheikh Tahir Wyatt is joining us on the line, and I want to greet him by saying Assalamu alaikum, brother Imam Sheikh Tahir. How are you, my brother?
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm fine, alhamdulillah.
Good. I'm very happy that you're fine. I'm happy that you were able to make it back into the States, and you're here with us today on the show, brother. And I'm excited about that, man.
Alhamdulillah. Yeah, I'm happy I got back too, man.
In the history of the United Muslim Masjid, which is now 27 years here in the city of Philadelphia, we closed our doors. We closed our doors for the Jummah prayer in both of our facilities, both 15th Street United Muslim Masjid as well as UMIC 1251 Point Breeze Avenue. People were texting, they were calling, what's going on? Why is the masjid shut down? We're the believers, we only fear Allah. Why are we doing this? My advice to people that were contacting me was basically, look at what's going on around us. Look at the times that we are in when they are shutting down schools. They're shutting down all types of facilities all across the city. And I mentioned to them that just earlier in the week, you had the religious authorities or council within the city of Philadelphia came together with the mayor and different other management of the city, and they had to make a hard choice to close their doors for their religious services as well. How hard of a decision was that for you, along with the board of directors of the United Muslim Masjid, to shut down for the Jummah prayer service?
Well, it was so hard that it definitely wasn't unanimous. So it wasn't a unanimous decision amongst the board to shut down. And I mean, that just shows you that it was not an easy decision to make. But I'll say this: when you look at the way that the public responds, meaning public in terms of how our government is handling things, when non-essential businesses are being closed, when again, you got schools that have been closed, schools, universities, all educational institutions are being closed. I mean, the fact of the matter remains is that it's very reasonable to consider, the fact that we have to shut our doors. If in the event that there was a major snowstorm that caused difficulty for people getting to the masjid, or in fact, schools were closed, government was closed, to the end of it, we would consider at that point also closing down the masjid, even though we only fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't fear the ice. We don't fear the snow. But the practicality of the situation may require that we don't hold Jummah at that particular time. So as it stands right now, the difference here, I think, for a lot of people is that the United States, alhamdulillah, has not faced the fate of Italy. I think that if we had, we're seeing how the people are dying. I mean, they're getting 475 deaths in one day because of the strain on their medical system. We haven't gotten to that point in the United States. I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He remove this affliction from us, from the people as a whole. And I hope that we don't get to that point. But I think for some people, it's not real until it happens to somebody in their community. And the reality is Muslims have been afflicted by it. Here in the United States, I have a very good friend who's a physician, in fact, who recently tested positive for coronavirus over 6 or 7 days ago. He's still asymptomatic. So it just so happens, because he's a physician and because of the position that he's in, that he did test, right? But the reality is that he's a carrier of the virus, and he shows no symptoms. And that's the reality for many people who have been infected. They've been infected by people who do not show the symptoms of the virus. And I guess that's part of what makes this a little bit tricky to deal with, right? Because you're not dealing with people who are open, not necessarily. You're not necessarily dealing with people who are showing symptoms, yet they could still spread the virus. And here's the other thing. For a lot of people, what concerns them is that, well, this virus is not necessarily deadly, meaning that the majority of the people who get this virus are not going to die from the virus. They're not even going to be hospitalized, which is true. However, the problem with that logic is that we don't have the medical facilities on a global level, to deal with the number of people who would need to be hospitalized if we don't slow down the spread of this thing and, spread it out over time. And I think that's where the danger comes in. So we have to be precautious. And part of that precaution, and that's what you're seeing in much of the Muslim world, throughout the Middle East and other parts of the Muslim world, North Africa, where they've decided that to shut things down because the best way to control an epidemic is to not mix with people. And so we had a plague that happened at the time of the Sahaba, radiallahu anhum. It was called Ta'un Amwas. And basically, that was the one. It's kind of famous hadith where Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu was heading north from Medina towards the Sham, Syria, Palestine area. And he heard about the plague that had come to the people there of Sham. And so he returned back to Medina. Long story short, the governor of Sham at that time, who was Amr ibn al-As, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, may Allah, peace and blessing, or may Allah be pleased with him, what he said to the people, the advice that he gave to the people at that time was, "An tafarraqu fil jibal," which means basically to split up and go out to the mountains. In other words, split up from each other, be distant from each other. This is the way that is going to keep the plague. This was their own, method of isolation, if you will, for those who were ill, and then quarantining those who were not ill. That was their own method of dealing with it, and it's still the best way to deal with these type of situations when we're dealing with highly contagious diseases. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Allah definitely knows best. Let me just say this, and then I'll let you, pose whatever question you have. We have in the hadith of the Prophet in both Bukhari and Muslim, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "There is no adwa," which means there is no contagion, there is no infectious disease that spreads by itself, which is an important concept to understand. Meaning that these diseases are agents and they don't act independently. You could have three people in a room. One of them is known to have a disease. He sneezes, and on both people at the same time, one of them gets sick and the other one doesn't, right? And that's the decree of God, that one of them would get sick and the other one doesn't. So as Muslims, we don't believe that these diseases act independently of the will of God, that they're not outside of the will of God. In that same hadith at the end, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, وَفِرَّ مِنَ الْمَجْدُومِ كَمَا تَفِرُّ مِنَ الْأَسَدِ, and run away from the leper, and the one who has leprosy, which is a contagious disease, as you know, the way that you would run away from a lion. So here we have two things in play. The Prophet is instructing us how to approach this theologically in terms of how we believe in something. We believe that these things will not affect us except by the will of God. At the same time, we take precautions and we run away from it the way that we would run away from a lion. Now, again, what makes this a little bit different is that we don't exactly know who has it or not, right? and unless we know that this person has been quarantined, they haven't come into contact with anybody else for the last, let's say 14 days, 7 to 14 days, you can pretty much be sure that this person is not even a carrier. But the reality is we have to take precautions, but not be oversensitive, not be, maybe not oversensitive is not the word. We need to be precautious, but we don't need to be scared of everybody.
Right. I want to talk about the thought, and you can help me understand this. Can we do a remote Juma prayer? Is that possible? I know that in the situation, the masjid was open, but the Dhuhr prayer was observed. Can you do a remote prayer? Is that something that we can stream so people can see that? Is that a possibility?
Well, not exactly, but what is a possibility, and perhaps we should do this moving forward. What we could do is, have 10 brothers, for example, come together in the masjid.
Mm-hmm.
One of them would give the khutbah, for example, Imam Hanif would give the khutbah. And that could be streamed so that people would still benefit from a khutbah every week. But in terms of the salat itself, at that point, the live stream would need to stop, and those people who are watching, whether in their homes or their offices or wherever they may be, they would need to pray Dhuhr.
Okay.
And they could not follow the imam praying Jumu'ah.
Okay. That's how I've always wondered about that. Now, I want to ask you, although we may have suspended temporarily the congregational Juma prayer, what about the fact that you still have an alarming number of people, men and women, coming to the masjid to make the 5 daily prayers? Maybe not so much the Fajr prayer, but the Dhuhr, the Asr, the Maghrib, the Isha prayer. You still have a big number of people coming in the masjid. Let's talk about what procedures that United Muslim Masjid is making as far as the cleanliness of the masjid. Is there a protocol that after every prayer, the doorknobs is going to be wiped down, the bathroom is going to be sanitized? How about that?
Well, let me just say, I am quarantined.
You got a self-quarantine going on, huh?
I really do. As per government regulations. I mean, it's mandated by the government. And, we received the instructions coming into JFK. And also my personal position kind of reemphasized that point. So there was from a leadership standpoint, we have discussed taking certain measures. To be honest with you, I cannot say that someone is enforcing them because I'm not there and I have not been able to check to make sure. However, what I will say is this. We have changed, or at least in terms of policy, we have changed the opening and closing times for the masjid. So the masjid is open 5 minutes before the adhan. It closes 10 minutes following the main congregation with no exception. And that gives us a chance to disinfect the masjid. Everybody has to bring their own prayer rug. If not, the other alternative that we have is putting down the brown bathroom paper towels over top of the carpet so that they can be removed immediately. And we're not worried about the virus being in the carpet.
Okay.
The other part, and I really hope this is being abided by, but I'm really not sure. My suggestion was to totally shut down the restroom and the wudu station. And the reason for that is that viruses spread more in moist environment, wet surfaces. So, and you really can't control the disinfecting part of that. So let's just say, for example, a person does have the virus, goes in, turns on the sink or at the wudu area, right? Um, Another person comes in right behind them, has no idea. That person doesn't know they're infected. They have no idea. They come in and they also turn on the sink. It's more likely to spread through those wet surfaces than any other way.
Yeah.
Even airborne.
Yes. Yes.
So, my opinion was to totally shut down the restrooms. That was met with a little bit of resistance, but because the reality is that people need to make wudu to pray. And my thing was, that's not the master's problem. These are dire circumstances.
Yeah, you're right.
We have to take extreme measures. It is what it is. And if they need to make wudu, they get a bottle. They can go outside and make wudu. I mean, the other thing is, as you know, many of our patrons, constituents, are not African American. They come from backgrounds where they don't believe that it's permissible to wipe over their socks for wudu, which is a whole nother issue, right? So what's happening is that every time they come in the masjid, they're taking off their socks and they're washing their feet, and they're not putting their socks back on because what? Because their feet are wet, right? You know how their feet get dry? They walk on the carpet.
Ooh.
Right. And so we're dealing with a situation now. No, really. I mean, let's just think about this thing practically.
Right.
We're dealing with a situation now. I mean, this has been a problem at most masjids like forever. It's not something new. The area where you first come in, that area has to be shampooed a lot more often than other areas. And so what's happening is now, I mean, to me, that's a hazard. And we have to be very careful about that. But in general, I don't think that leaving the masjid open for the regular prayers is anywhere near like leaving it open for Salat al-Jum'ah.
Okay.
But again, as I mentioned before, on a personal note, I'm not against keeping it open even for Salat al-Jum'ah if it's done responsibly.
Sheikh, I wanted to ask you in regard, in the light of some of the decisions that have been made, could you expound upon the concept or the idea of maqasid al-sharia and those five things, or if not those five things, regarding life and the protection of life that the sharia takes in consideration in our deen?
Yeah, stay on the line, inshallah. So as we know, our sharia, and in fact, every legislation of every prophet has come to protect five main interests. The first is the protection of the deen. Second is the protection of life, preservation of life. Then comes the preservation of the mind, that is preservation of mental health, and sanity, and mental well-being. Fourth is the preservation of wealth, and fifth is the preservation of honor or one's progeny, and that can be perhaps interchanged numbers 4 and 5. The point is that the preservation of life is very important. The emphasis that Islam puts on the sanctity of life is second to none. I mean, you won't find another sharia with the text that we have that look at or that talk about the importance of the preservation of life. And so the decisions that have been made across the board have been made with that particular maqsad or that particular objective in mind, and that is that we are to do our best to save lives. At the same time, preservation of faith is very important, and so what you'll see is that some people look at keeping the masajid open as a way of preserving faith. In my opinion, that may be a little bit over. I'm not gonna say it's reaching, but I think that we can preserve faith down the line without the masjid, with the masjid being temporarily closed. I think it's still possible to preserve faith, and we have instances historically where a person has been made to say something that would denounce faith so that they could save their lives. So anyway, these are all things that have to be taken into consideration.
MashaAllah.